All right, everybody, welcome to Wednesday night online. Thanks for coming to hang out with us for a few minutes. We do find a whole lot of value. We think it's great if, as often as we can, to be honest with you, but especially on a Wednesday, we're used to this as a church, to take a time out for a few minutes and gather our minds and collect our thoughts. And we dig into the Bible story for a bit, some biblical truth that we want to make sure we apply to our lives. And so tonight's going to be no different. Before we jump in, I want to encourage you. I look forward to these times. I look forward to the moments that we get back in rooms together and discover and learn and ask and pray with and all of those things that we get to do for and with one another. And so we look forward to that. As we get closer to those days, I want to encourage you to stay connected. Okay, look for a way to serve. Keep that heart of gratitude. Make sure you're thinking along those lines. Don't let social distancing turn into isolation. I think that's a bad move. That can cause a whole lot of other problems. Matter of fact, I heard a difference in this I think is good. I want to try to adopt it. Not social distancing, but physical distancing. I think that's a better way to describe maybe what the goal is. Don't slip into isolation. I know it can be easy to do that, but it matters. It matters that you stay connected to each other and to, of course, your spiritual growth. All these moments that we're experiencing together. Don't put our relationship with God on pause. Don't think that you don't need people or need to focus on get the things of God until all this is over. Right. So our prayer and what we've been seeing honestly is that more people are looking for hope than ever. And so as a church, we've been able to meet those needs. We've had people connected to our church we didn't know before, and we know them now. We look forward to meeting them in person. We've been able to meet a bunch of needs in our city. We've been able to do some special things for folks throughout our church, whether it's our elderly folks or those that serve in special ways. We've been able to do some cool stuff, and so what a fun thing to be a part of. And I'm glad that you're along for the journey tonight. All right, so take just a few minutes here and let's think. And here's what I wanted to talk about as we go through this challenge. Is the truth we're going to discover is the story of one person. It's a story in the Old Testament, and what we're going to discover is this: that God's greater than your greatest challenges. That God is greater than your greatest challenges. Now, I love stories, don't you? It's part of it's a bigger part of our life than we realize, I think. And you may think books when you think stories, and books might cause you to shudder a little bit if you're not a reader, or you're flashback to school or college or something, and all these books you had to read. Maybe you're not much of a reader, but the truth is there's stories and a story embedded in your favorite movie. I mean, it's part of the plot line. That's what makes a movie great. Movies that you fall in love with, partly you fall in love with the story. Sure, you might love the special effects, or you might love the setting in history, or the specific scene, or relate to something a certain way. But the story is always a big part of the draw. It's what you get in your favorite sitcom. It's what you get in your favorite comic book. It's what you get in your favorite podcast, or even your favorite music. I'm guessing there is a story that you resonate with. Stories really do matter. Now, here's the point tonight, is that we can learn a lot from the stories of other people. I remember growing up that I learned a lot from watching my older brother. Every once in a while, not a whole lot, he'd get in trouble. And I would remember what he got in trouble for, so I didn't get in trouble for the very same thing. So I was learning from somebody else's story. Sometimes you learn what not to do. That's what I did in those moments. But I want to take a few minutes here and look at a story in the Bible. It's a story that's going to help you right here and right now with whatever you're dealing with. It's Joshua's story. It's in the Old Testament. If you have a Bible or can look it up off to the side, if you happen to be watching on your phone, can't look up scripture, that's okay. We'll put some things there for you to see. Joshua's story is this. Joshua was born a slave in the land of Egypt. He was part of a group of people that wandered in a wilderness for 40 years. Joshua's story is so unique. Joshua, we find, was faithful to God. He wasn't perfect, but man, he focused on this and he worked hard to do the right things. Ultimately, God chose him to lead the nation of Israel into a land that God had promised them, but they weren't able to experience quite yet. But Joshua was the one. He's got an incredible story. Now, part of his story is that he faced challenges all throughout his life. You face challenges. We're facing one right now, right? I mean, if Joshua were sitting here today, if he could pull up a chair next to me, we didn't have to worry about physical distancing, he would say this: God is greater than your greatest challenges. I want to encourage you with that today, because you and I face challenges also. We face a health concern. We could face challenges when it comes to jobs or finances or economy or relationships. Maybe it's an internal temptation that you're the only one that knows about it. Maybe it's a struggle that's just been winning for a long time, and we face all kinds of challenges. Now, I think what matters is what you think during those challenges. What are you thinking about God during those challenges? I've heard somebody say this. It is the law that any difficulties that come to you at any time, no matter what they are, must be exactly what you need most in that moment to enable you to take the next step forward by overcoming them. Now, here is the key to this statement. The only real misfortune, the only real tragedy comes when we suffer without learning the lesson. I saw somebody else put it this way this past week. The best thing to do with dark days is take them to heart. It's a terrible loss when you don't grow through the darkness. So here's the deal. How are you growing through your challenges? We are going through some challenges right now. The only question we have is how are we going to go through it and how are we going to grow through it? That is possible. It is possible. Good things can come even from challenges. We see the Bible teaches us that. History tells us that. Did you know I read an article this past week that the game Candyland was invented during a pandemic? It was invented during an incredible crisis. A lady had got polio, and while she was in the ward, while she was in the hospital with all the other people who had this specific illness, she was surrounded by kids who couldn't see anybody, who couldn't be around anybody, who couldn't see their parents or brothers or sisters or go play on the playground. In that seclusion, this lady invented the game Candyland. See, most every game up until that point, you needed a whole bunch of people to play that game. You don't need that with Candyland. So in those moments, she was able to provide joy for all those kids and for herself. The game makers saw this and immediately picked up the game, and it became a bestseller in no time. And this lady, she donated all the proceeds to research to help these kids get well again. Even good things can come from challenges. Matters how we grow through it. It's a terrible loss when you don't grow through the darkness. So, how about Joshua? What about his story? First of all, he was born a slave. Now, can you imagine that? That's how his story starts. He wasn't living on Easy Street. Didn't have a big house to live in. Didn't have some cars to drive. He didn't have extra stuff. He wasn't the upper crust of his society. Never really had experienced true freedom. And he was part of a nation that leaves this captivity from Egypt, and they're heading for a land that God had promised them. And the description was that it was a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, very prosperous and very plentiful and bountiful for these people. They couldn't wait to get there. Now, he had just been a leader of his family. He had no battle experience. He wasn't like an extra specially trained warrior. Now, a certain part in this journey, he is chosen as one of 12 spies to go explore this promised land. And when they come back, only 2 of the 12, Joshua and a man named Caleb, were the only ones who thought they could go in and take the land. But he couldn't convince anybody. There's an account of this in Numbers 14. You can check it out later. Everybody was the challenge. All everybody saw, was the challenge. The people there, they're bigger than us. It literally says they were giants. In other words, they're so big we feel like grasshoppers compared to them. We've just been slaves our whole lives, and what do we have to offer? And there's people already there, and they're bigger and more powerful than us. And so because of that lack of faith and because of disobedience, this group of people, this nation of 2 million people, wandered the desert for 40 years. Talk about a challenge. And at some point in this journey, Joshua is chosen to be the leader. He's got to do this, by the way, without a leader and mentor in his life, Moses as well. Here are a couple things out of Joshua's life that can help you and I today when we're worried about when we feel overwhelmed, when we're worried about what's next. Check it out, next few minutes. With God's help, you can do a couple things. First of all, you can rise above your past. Maybe that's a challenge for you. Maybe you're stuck in who you used to be. Maybe you're stuck with memories of what you've done or what you've said or where you've been, or regrets are filling your mind. Joshua at one point couldn't even convince 10 other people that they could go take the promised land, and so he could have viewed himself as a failure with no influence. Joshua would say this: I realize my failure doesn't define my future or determine my future. God's will and my obedience will do that. So you can get past your fears. You can rise above your past. Here's the second thing from Joshua. Trust God's promises. With God's help, right now, with whatever challenge you're faced, you can trust God's promises. Joshua 1, 5 and 6 says this. These are the words of God to Joshua. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. You see, the promised land contained like 300,000 square miles. It was huge, and God made a promise he was going to deliver it. And Joshua trusted God's promise. See, it's not about the strength of your faith. It's about the object of your faith. That's what matters. It's not like, well, if I've got level 5 faith and I just need to jump to level 8 faith, all of a sudden I'll be better. No, it's not about you being stronger. It's about what are you placing your trust in? And when you place your trust in God's promises, it's the object of your faith that makes all the difference. Okay, here's one more thing. Joshua's story that you and I can relate with. Obey God and do what you can do. See, leading 2 million people was no small task for Joshua. They had to cross this powerful river, and it was a mile across where they were supposed to be. And here's what Joshua says in Joshua 3:5. He says to the people that he's leading, Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. What that word consecrate means is it means to be dedicated to service and loyalty to God. It speaks of holiness and cleansing. It's got to do with moral quality and obedience to the behaviors that God desires, in contrast to corruption. So it matters how you live. We see this in 2 Corinthians 7:1 too. Since we have these promises, it says, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear of God. In other words, Joshua would say this: if you really want to trust God's promises, if you really want to rise above your fear, if you really want to see God at work, when you feel overwhelmed, live a holy life. It matters how you live. It doesn't make any sense to live however we want and then ask God to do great works in our lives when we're not even willing to follow what he says. It matters how you live. Can I ask you, how's your obedience to God doing lately? How's your obedience to God doing lately? Just do the next right thing. So you obey God and do what you know to do. And then the last thing, trust God to do what only he can do, to do what you cannot do. If we want God's help with our greatest challenges, we must do what he asks, and then we trust him. So they're about to cross this Jordan River. Joshua's leading all these people, and they can't. It's too deep, and it's too wide, and it's too fast. And check out what happens. Joshua 3:16. The water's coming down from above. So as soon as these people step their foot on the water bank, right on the coastline there, as soon as their feet touched that water, the water's coming down from above, stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, a city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing downward to the Sea of Arabah, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. We do what we can do, and we trust God to do what we can't do, what only he can do. A lot of times what happens is we want God to come fix everything in our lives, but we don't want to change the way we're living. And instead of saying, God, I need you to come fix this, he wants to walk along with us as we live for him and follow him. How about this? Too often our problems are pictures without God in them. Don't take God out of the picture. Don't take God out of the picture. Stay close to him. And when you feel overwhelmed, when your challenges seem too big, you get reminded you have a God who can do what you can't. Our job is to obey. Our job is to trust and obey. His job is to do what he can do. All right? We love you. Hey, let's take these words and put them into practice in our lives. We can't wait to connect with you again. We'll see you online this weekend, 9:30, 11, and 5 on Facebook, and then on demand starting at 9:30 on Instagram, TV, and YouTube, and our website, hccmidland.com. We look forward to connecting with you. Let us know if you need anything, and we can't wait to see you again. See you then. All right, bye.